Welcome back to the Lucky Orange Show. I'm your host, Sean McCarthy, and on today's episode, we're talking about a topic that is really, really important for anybody using Lucky Orange, because Lucky Orange is a conversion rate optimization toolkit. But there's a question that often comes up, which is I see a lot of information inside Lucky Orange, and I have a lot of behavioral analytics findings, but what am I going to do about them? And the answer lies squarely in the expertise of our guest today in experimentation and CRO and how this all plays together. Our guest today is Carlos Trujillo from Speero. Carlos, hi. How are you? And welcome.
Hey, Sean. Very excited to be on the show. Thank you for having me. And yeah, happy to dive into some of the topics.
Yeah, awesome. So I've looked at, for what it's worth, let's kind of tee up the fact that you have a course that recently came out over on CXL called CRO for e-commerce growth. We'll talk about some of the content that lives in there and the importance of that sort of thing. And part of that was you mentioned that a lot of CRO efforts, conversion rate optimization efforts, plateau because people have a sole focus on conversions. I'm curious if we could start there by talking a little bit about why it might be problematic for people to solely focus on conversions when it comes to CRO.
Right. So basically, just to add a little context, at Speero, we run CRO programs for, different kind of clients on different verticals, but a big customer base is on e-com and particularly D2C e-commerce, Shopify merchants, if you will. So what we have seen over the years is that there's not an inherent problem with focusing on increasing your conversions. The problem is believing that's the go-to solution for everyone. Because conversion rate as a metric, as a goal to optimize for, can be actually easy to manipulate. If you think about it, like obviously like conversion rates skyrocket on like the holiday season, for example, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, that kind of seasonality. Or if you do heavy discounting, suddenly like your conversion rates might increase.
Sure.
But they are not always an indicator that you're growing as a business or that you are increasing the profitability. So this claim about CRO or optimizing for more conversions not being always the answer comes from that experience of knowing for some companies actually there are scenarios where increasing conversion rates might hurt the business.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's all sorts of variables out there that can change the reporting, that can play with the metrics. And there's this old story and concept called the Cobra effect. And I'll kind of like misrepresent it probably, but basically there was a problem in some ancient land where there were too many cobras on the streets. And so they put out a bounty for the local people to say, every time you kill a cobra and bring it to us, you get $1 or whatever currency it was in. And the problem ended up being is that people started to breed cobras, and then their problem got even worse. And so it's not exactly the same here, but that's to say that when we focus on potentially the wrong problem, or we try and apply the wrong solution to say, let's just increase our conversion rate, then you hand that off to somebody in the team and they go increase the conversion rate. But what else is happening in the bigger picture? In the bigger picture, I kind of want to throw back to you. I mean, we talk about CRO and experimentation. I've teed that up a little bit, being all part of kind of a similar thing. Let's apply maybe a definition there. When we say experimentation as it relates to the website, what does that mean to you?
Well, let me kind of take that back a little bit further because, yeah, there's actually kind of like an ongoing debate about whether it should be called CRO or experimentation or what the difference is. My take is when we talk about experimentation, we focus on the practice, on the process, not necessarily on the outcome. So the most mature companies have actually different people and stakeholders for the experimentation practice and the outcome of positively influencing the business outcome, meaning increasing conversion rates or AOBs or whatever. So there's obviously in that sense a little bit of an conflict of interest when CRO teams are in charge of launching experiments and analyzing the data and doing the whole thing, because of course they are biased towards showing and believing that their suggestions, their treatments, the changes they're introducing are the best. There's a big confirmation bias on that spectrum. So to me, that's the main difference. In the day to day, there might not be that many differences between what CRO or experimentation is. That's the way I see it. And I have had the opportunity to work with e-com companies that I would myself classify as like trying to do experimentation and trying to do CRO. The main difference being what I just mentioned before.
Right. And at the end of the day, it might be semantics, and it might really
Yeah.
only matter if you're at a big company with a bunch of people trying to chase similar but slightly different goals. When people come to Speero seeking guidance and help with their program, do you usually see that they're doing some level of CRO and experimentation on their end? And it kind of within that question, where do you look for opportunities within that? Is it kind of the process, or is it more so the specific findings of how we can optimize your site, if that makes sense?
So in the case of Speero, most of the clients that come to us are already doing some kind of or have already ongoing CRO efforts or experiments. By experiments, we normally refer to A/B tests or online controlled experiments.
Hmm.
So most of the companies we work with are already doing that, at least to some extent. However, in most cases, they are stuck in some part of the process, either because they are not ideating fast enough or they can come up with ideas that are impactful enough to actually move the needle, or just because a common case is they don't have enough front end developers to develop experiments because they are all swamped with the normal backlog of the product. So that's like the most common scenario. So what we try to do is to balance out like a process driven approach, if you will, with the business impact. So what I personally try to do as a strategist is to try to learn as much as possible about their audience and their customers so that we can identify the biggest optimization opportunities. One big problem in e-commerce is that a lot of companies will mainly get inspired by copying somebody else's experiences or websites or you name it. So one of my big missions as a strategist in this case is to kind of take a step back, start to analyzing qualitative and quantitative data, obviously using tools like Lucky Orange, where we get to see how people actually use the product. What do they say when we have the opportunity to ask them? That being my favorite type of user research, and then kind of connecting the dots so that we can get to let's say a next level in terms of potential for improvement and optimization further than just copying what somebody else is doing, because I mean in all honesty that will only get you so far. If you really want to move the needle and introduce changes that can be measured and can be impactful, you really need to tackle specific problems that are relevant to your customers.
Yeah. I was speaking with somebody recently, and they were talking about how with a lot of e-commerce folks that they want to jump straight into A/B testing because they think that they have such an amazing understanding of their customer immediately, and they may not see the need for all the full-on research, surveys, sessions, and heat maps analysis and all that stuff. Do you agree that, I mean, obviously we're talking about the research part of it, so that's a part of your process, but what would you say to somebody who's running a brand that says, you know what, we can experiment and run A/B tests properly that are based in our gut feeling enough to grow our conversion rate, to increase our average order value, whatever it is, we can do that without the customer research?
Well, that's a fun question. So in my experience, what I have seen other agencies doing, and like a common go-to approach, is tackling usability problems and treating
Mm,
them as as tests, so that you are able to skyrocket conversions for your clients. But to me, that's not really CRO. Like, usability issues should be fixed regardless of if you want to experiment or put together a CRO program. So the reality is, as somebody running A/B tests every single day, most of the tests won't really move the needle. Most of the treatments and changes you introduce to the product won't really move the needle. So you need to be strategic about what you want to focus on. So, for example, if you're more of like an emerging brand, A/B testing might not be the right solution for you. You might be better spend resources and time learning about your users, identifying big opportunities, and probably this might be polemic coming from me, but probably just making the change without even testing it. Because in many cases, that's the best approach. You don't always have to run an A/B test for making decisions. At the end of the day, an A/B test is simply a mechanism to answer a business questions. But if your questions are not good enough, not strategic enough, well, like garbage in, garbage out, you know? So I would rather focus on learning more about my users and taking some bets and making the changes right away. Of course, there's not a one size fits all solution, but in my experience, what I can tell you, it's I have seen several companies trying to do A/B tests probably earlier than they should, and getting frustrated about this because they cannot really see an impact happening, or an impact that's according to their investment, you know.
yeah. I think a lot of people like to run A/B tests because it shows action. So if you're, really candidly, if you're on a marketing team somewhere and it's your job to A/B test and optimize, or it's if your job to optimize, you're going to run A/B tests to show that you're doing something and that you're testing something and that you're implying some sort of scientific nature about your work. And so there might be a bias towards running A/B tests, but you're totally right that you just simply, first of all, have to have enough traffic for it to bake out and become significant within a reasonable amount of time.
Exactly.
But you really, I am curious, if you are advising a smaller team versus a much larger team, do you think that that's kind of aligns with a little bit of where you're talking about, which is that if you have the time and space within the team to do deeper research, then you should be doing it. But if you can't do it, there might be better places to spend your time. When it comes to the CRO and experimentation, there might be some places where you just have to kind of say, we just have to ship this change because we're confident in it. We've done some level of research or whatever it is, as opposed to hold on, before we do that, we have to run a bunch of customer surveys and do all this other research.
So actually, and this is something I mentioned in my CXL course, and this is something I have like, this is data I have collected throughout the years, like informally. A good CRO program is actually 80% user research and 20% experimentation. Like experimentation, and again, mostly referring to A/B test,
Mm.
it's just a validation method. But those opportunities for growth and for improvement really come from understanding your customers better. And obviously, understanding your customers better doesn't only mean doing what they tell you to do or what they believe you should do on their behalf, but actually trying to again connect the dots, and hence the importance of running different kind of research methods, not only a single one, so that you understand where the opportunities lie. So yeah, to answer your question more specifically, I would definitely advise, like, unless you have, I mean, this is debatable as well, but I think the magic number is doing more than 500 $100,000 in revenue per month. In my experience, that's the point where it really makes a lot of sense to A/B test as much as you can, because you can detect the effect of really smaller changes. If you're below that level, my go-to approach would be to do mainly user research and try to continue moving forward using these as a way to inform these decisions. Of course, there's no better method to determine causality than running an A/B test with statistical rigor, which is another topic of conversation because it's usually overlooked, but it's definitely not the solution for everyone. Alternatively, there might be a middle ground where you can run some tests, but maybe just in key areas of your website, for example. So let's say on your bestseller product page, instead of just running tests across the board or on the homepage, on the cart page, like you might want to detect where the most traffic is, as well as the most money, and maybe just focus there. So I have worked with companies where we have run tests only on the PDP for like 6 months, and it's been quite impactful. But uh, yeah, generally speaking, I would say if you wanna do A/B testing, you should definitely do the homework, understand where you are in the maturity spectrum, if you will. We have some tools at Speero to help you with that. By the way, some free tools that we can link in the resources.
Cool.
But yeah, if you're below those levels I just mentioned, user research is the real way to optimize things out more confidently. That's definitely my advice here. And as mentioned at the beginning, it's not only about the conversion. There are other, I'll call them pillars, where you could influence a business growth beyond conversions. There's a whole world of optimization opportunities that a lot of companies don't really put a lot of attention on, but where a lot of money lies, for sure.
I want to get to the pillars, but I'm not going to let you. I'm not going to let you leave behind the idea of statistical rigor, because I do think that that's super duper important. Because if you're running tests and you're doing everything right, if you're not nailing that part, you're making decisions based on a false, either a false positive, false negative, whatever it might be within your testing. You could be making a decision that costs you a ton of money because you thought that the test was telling you one thing, or you thought that your audience was segmented one way. Give me just like the high level overview of where you think people are missing the mark when it comes to statistical rigor.
Right, absolutely. So the main factor is definitely running tests without having enough traffic, not having enough statistical power. So basically, there's an analogy of like throwing a a coin, throwing a coin, like flipping a coin 10 times, and you might get 7 tails. And that doesn't mean it's more likely that you will get tails instead of heads,
Right.
So that's very similar, and I see this quite often. It's a little sad and frustrating, but there are so many companies, so many like use cases being published out there where people are calling winners with a sample of like, I don't know, 10 versus 15 conversion, or 60 versus 50 conversions. And it seems like a big win, but the only thing that this data is telling you is that you didn't test on enough people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely the most common like misunderstanding and misusing of A/B testing as a method, not making sure that you have enough traffic to make reliable decisions. In most cases, if you have more low traffic volume and you still wanted to run A/B tests, you will need to run them for months, and of course that's not realistic either. So yeah, I'm happy to share some resources on this topic because it's
Yeah.
it's really a big thing, and hence that's exactly why I don't recommend A/B testing to every company out there, because the more you learn about the method, the more you understand that this is not what most of the companies even need, I would say. Of course, if you compare the e-commerce vertical, and I know uh, most of the audience here are e-commerce vendors or agencies or like people uh, in this vertical, it definitely makes way more sense to run A/B test on e-commerce compared to like B2B SaaS or lead gen. Generally speaking, of course, there are exceptions. But even if you are on e-commerce and you are able to measure revenue and you have a big sample because you're on D2C, uh, still need to be taken with, carefully, because it's very, very, very easy to make interpretation mistakes when you run A/B test. Not to mention all the technical nuances that the method might have, like things can go wrong easily without you noticing. Maybe let's say you put a variant together, you didn't notice, but the variant doesn't load correctly on like Google Chrome or some kind of mobile
Mm.
browser you're not aware of because you didn't do comprehensive or detailed QA process. So that's definitely another world of where to put your attention on. But yeah, it's definitely a great method as long as you take it seriously.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that anybody can set up an A/B test and publish it, sign up for an A/B testing tool or whatever. You can click publish and you can say that you're A/B testing and say we're done. We're testing.
Exactly.
We're doing it. Anybody can do it, but it is a very serious thing with very serious potential implications, business decisions to be made, winning and losing, whatever it is. Like, it is a very serious thing that's worth the time to do it right and pay attention and make sure that even before you get started, that it's the right solution for you. And there's other examples of that in business, even in marketing, where it's like, should we be, as a small team, spending a bunch of time chasing SEO goals? Well, sure, getting more organic traffic to our website would be amazing, but is there opportunity? And do we have the bandwidth to kick out enough blog posts or whatever it might be to win in the SERP? It's a similar idea where it's if you're going to invest in this, because it is an investment, then you need to do it the right way. And I think that part of doing it the right way is there's a framework that you've talked about previously, which would be those pillars. And again, just kind of drawing attention to the course Speero for e-commerce growth. I think there's 4 pillars, right? Can we talk through each of those and kind of explain how they work together, and why this is a good way to be thinking about Speero and experimentation?
Absolutely. So basically, the thesis here is that if you want to drive business growth through experimentation and through CRO, basically meaning researching and introducing changes to the product being the website in most of the cases here, you can actually drive this growth not only influencing conversions, but influencing spend, meaning influencing that people spend more on your store, or influencing the purchase frequency, meaning that people either accept a subscription offering from their first purchase, or that they come back repeatedly as a customers over time. Or you can even influence growth by optimizing your catalog, which in which I refer to as merchandising, the merchandising pillar. So basically, there are scenarios where you might have the same conversion rate, the same AOV, the same purchase frequency, but if you push one product that is more profitable to you than others, that will still influence growth for the business. So the idea here with this set of pillars and this framework is to allow merchants to think beyond just conversions, as I mentioned before, and think more broadly about those different ways how you can influence this. Now, there are some caveats here. As you progress towards these pillars, and they have this order, for a reason, it becomes more complicated to measure the effectiveness of your changes or your treatments. Because, for example, to your point before, you go sign up for a testing tool, they will relatively easy allow you to measure conversions by tracking visits to a thank you page. That's like the default. So you're good to go, let's say, from day one to measure that kind of effectiveness. Now, if you want to measure revenue, things get slightly more complicated, but it's still doable. Most of the A/B testing tools, merchants, have probably a Shopify app or a script you can put on your thank you page again and measure revenue. Side note here is that you need to be careful about this because there are scenarios where, for example, I I had a relatively recent experience with a client where a big customer base was checking out with PayPal, and hence a lot of people weren't returning to the thank you page. So
Mm,
we had to switch
mm,
to server side tracking of these goals via an API because we weren't getting a good match between what we were seeing on the testing tool than what were seeing on the ecom platform. Uh, just as a side note of the kind of things that start getting
yeah,
becoming more complicated. If you want to measure frequency, it can get equally challenging because most of the testing tools won't allow you to measure like purchase frequency. You'll launch a test, you will know how many people checked out or converted, but you don't really have a clear way to know if they came back as customers down the road. You know, and it's even more
yeah,
challenging to measure the effectiveness of the merchandising optimization initiatives because most of the testing tool won't tell you about profitability or cost of goods or this kind of calculations that you might need in place to actually measure the impact on the bottom line or on the P&L. So it becomes more complicated over time if you want to tackle those pillars. But in my experience, that's where the most impact is. And by the most impact, I'm not referring that everyone should optimize their catalog of products, but it might be your case. Like if you know your unit economics well enough, you might know that maybe your problem is not about people converting, but maybe people not coming back. Or maybe you might want to test your prices and find out if you can charge 10% more for your products without harming conversions. So there's definitely a whole world of examples where what you're trying to tackle is not more conversions, but trying to basically to find new ways how you have a more healthy business and a more profitable one. That will be the ultimate goal. Um, of course, again, it's hard to measure. In most cases, this will involve using some kind of data warehouse to combine data sources together. When possible, you might want to, if you're, I don't know, you're testing something to increase subscription take-in, you might want to ensure this data is connected with Lucky Orange so that you can see session recordings of those seeing the variant, like that kind of things. It's not something you would do the first day if you're starting out with your CRO effort, but it's definitely somewhere you should get to if you want to really use CRO as a way to make a big impact on the business.
yeah. And it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about things in a broader, potentially and ideally more impactful way from we are just going to optimize for the click on the button to add to cart and just do whatever we possibly can to run A/B tests on our PDP and whatever, to more broadly thinking about the business as a whole, the business health as a whole. Because if you could, if you can increase frequency, like you said, that maybe has an outsized impact on your revenue overall compared to a simple increase in conversion percentage. And even though
Totally.
it may be, as you go through conversion, spend, frequency, and merchandising, as you go through those, it may be difficult to measure some of these. I do think that it's a good tool for people to be thinking about the levers that they can pull to grow their business and the way of thinking about how your business can evolve, even if it doesn't lead to a true quote unquote experiment. It could lead to a way of saying, hey, we want to focus on increased purchase frequency from people. So what can we do? Okay, well, maybe we can do something with email marketing, or maybe we can do something with whatever. The predecessor to, or not the predecessor, but the step before all of these is the customer research still, though, right? Like, even if
Totally.
you're saying we want to experiment with frequency or merchandising, you're still doing some variation of customer research. Could you tell me a little bit about maybe how you might change your approach, or is it very similar if you're targeting, let's say, an increase in frequency versus one of the other pillars?
So actually, that's a great point because my one of my biggest lessons after like doing CRO so actively, and by that I mean after seeing the results of so many A/B tests, is that
Yeah.
when you do this strategically, meaning customer research with tools like Lucky Orange, and even like with A/B testing, what you realize is that you can extrapolate this data and use it to optimize other parts of the funnel. So if you ask the right
Mm.
questions, if you analyze the right data that come from your website being the like the place where you can have the most opportunities to be flexible in terms of where you ask questions, how you control your audience,
Yeah.
then you can use those learnings to optimize your acquisition initiatives, your creatives, your email marketing campaigns. Like that's what the most mature CRO programs focus on. Even if the testing or the user research happens mainly on the website, they are really good at taking these insights and kind of recycling them or leveraging them across the
Hmm.
whole funnel. So
Yeah.
it's not an end, but more of like a mean, so that you grow as a business. Because of
Yeah.
course,
Totally.
it's not that easy or that feasible to run, I don't know, like post purchase polls in Facebook ads. That's not even a thing, as
Hmm.
far as I know.
Hmm.
So give me a second. So I think that's something I would definitely encourage companies to do, to maintain what we refer to as a knowledge database, so that they keep track of all the learnings they gather throughout their whole set of research initiatives, experiments, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I love that. Where do you recommend people keep that? Can it start as simple as a spreadsheet?
It can. I mean, a spreadsheet itself can get messy quite easily. So I would recommend
Hmm.
what I refer to as fancy spreadsheets like Notion or Airtable,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
in my experience, it gets easier to consume over time. At Speero, we use Airtable, and every
Okay.
one of our clients have a knowledge database built in Airtable, where you can get access to every single research activity that has been performed, as well as every single A/B test, with not only like the process
Cool.
behind each execution, but what I consider the key part, and scorecard. So every research activity will have a scorecard, which is basically like a one-page executive summary, as well as every A/B test. So kind of the value prop being like, this is what you're paying for. Like, even if we part ways, I don't know, in 2 years from now, this is what you
Yeah.
should keep maintaining and leveraging, so that 2 years from now, another new CMO don't come and suggest the same things that were already tested and maybe proven wrong. Of course, this goes with an asterisk, because the landscape changes over time, and there are things that are worth retesting over time. But generally speaking, it creates like and a database of knowledge that the company can leverage, and it makes a big difference over time, in my experience.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it can have such an impact on so many things. I mean, customer service scripts, all sorts of things that you can impact by better understanding the types of questions people are asking, the things that they're worried about. Is there something you can get in front of with your messaging and all of that? So it has such a huge impact, and it has a compounding return on itself if you can maintain that database and make it accessible to people. Like you said, of course, things evolve, but that knowledge isn't going anywhere. So every time you're on a survey, every time you find something interesting in session recordings or heat maps or whatever it might be, you're totally right that you have to keep that information somewhere. You can't just protect it. And even if you're currently, I would say too, even if you're a team right now of 1 or 2 or 3, and you think, oh, I remember all this, it's still worth writing down, because ideally you grow and then you become a team of 10 or 20, and you have a person who's experimenting and curious what you've done before. And the last thing you want them to do is to repeat and waste a bunch of time. And
Absolutely.
so I think that's huge.
And if you let me add something else here, the most mature
Please.
teams, in my experience, they start becoming more like tactical with these kind of practices. So maybe they would run that post-purchase poll only for the audience coming from like Google organic or Facebook ads or Instagram ads. You know what I mean? So which is something you could easily do with a tool like Lucky Orange. So that they start differentiating between the segments, potentially coming up with personalizations that can be activated to tailor the needs of every specific audience. So to your point before, like, there's no way you can store all those insights just in your brain. They need to be written somewhere, because otherwise things will get ignored over time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and perspective. I hope that I've certainly found it valuable. It's a cool way to think about experimentation in maybe a more responsible way. And I'm curious, either at Speero or with what you're working on, what has you most excited as we kind of head into the back half of 2024?
That's a good question. I'm a big fan of the voice of customer data as a research method. By that I mean polls, surveys, and every like leveraging every opportunity you have to hear from the customers. And I'm very excited about the influence that generative AI will have on those methods, because like even a year ago or maybe 2, you had to code like 500 poll responses like manually, and right now or maybe in the near future these will be easily done using AI tools. And by the way, I still recommend going through the 500 responses if you have the time and the chance. But it will serve as a great opportunity to spot optimization opportunities, compare them with a previous state of things. I'm very excited about the landscape on that specific front. I'm pretty sure Lucky Orange might surprise us with some stuff on that front at some point as well. So yeah, I see big opportunities on that.
Yeah. Super cool. You're not the first person actually to have said that specific thing. I think that there's these like common pain points that we have that we're hopeful AI can help fill in. And one of those is certainly parsing through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of survey responses to make sense of them in a similar fashion that we parse through things like session recordings to find high value intent and all that.
And technically that can be already done as of today by the time we record this, but we're not yet there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it will be better. Like I have no doubt it will get way better. And I'm looking forward to a world where we, without having to proactively look for it, the tools can tell us like what happened now compared to a previous period. So for example, if you introduce a change, like knowing if people stop complaining about whatever you try to fix, or to tackle. So yeah, that's gonna be fun for sure.
100%. Well, Carlos, where can people find you online, connect with you, as well as learn more about Speero?
Sure. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. That's definitely the best place to connect. My DMs are open if people want to ask questions, not only about the course, but what we do. And yeah, obviously, as well as in Speero.com, where we publish a lot of blueprints, frameworks. Last year, we put together a testing tool database of vendors, and we're throwing conferences. We're quite active on the landscape, the experimentation and CRO landscape. So yeah, definitely worth taking a look as well.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for carving out time and sharing your knowledge and perspective with me and our audience today. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, Sean, thanks for having me.